I'm gonna read I have the book here. But,
I have your book. You know what? We are a lot alike because we're very positive people.
right.
We have a lot in common.
Yes, thank you. All right, so this book is well, first of all, it's an amazing book. It's so well put together. It's called Code Crazy, One Psychologist Recovery from Codependency and Addiction, a memoir roadmap to freedom. Okay, we have Dr. Sarah Michaud, a clinical psychologist who has specialized in addiction and codependency for over 30 years. After 20 years of sobriety, she was forced to confront the shame of her husband's relapsing and the desperate behaviors one attempts to save another. What unfolded was a life that she could never have imagined. This book is about her journey back to her true self. It will help anyone who wants to live beyond trying to save, fix, or change another, whether it's a child, a spouse, a relative, or friend. It will transform you from the profound and debilitating effects of codependency to a life of authenticity, laughter, openness, and peace. Wow. That's heavy. All right. Well, welcome to the Sober is Dope podcast. I'm your host, Pop Buchanan. And Sarah, it is an honor to have you here today. How are you feeling in your recovery?
It's a pleasure to be here. I feel really great. I'm very honored to be here. I reviewed your book again, and I don't know. I've run into so many people in recovery, and I just so appreciate your positive outlook and all your affirmations and your belief system about changing our thinking, because this is a mental illness. I mean, addiction is a mental illness, right? It's one of the few illnesses that tells us that we don't have it. That's
Absolutely.
That's why it's so serious, because denial is the quintessential component of addiction. I mean, otherwise we'd say to someone who was killing themselves with alcoholism, hey, why don't you just quit? It's killing you. And they'd say, sure, but that's not what happens.
Right.
Yeah, that's not what happens.
So yes, go ahead.
No. You go ahead.
So, I mean, I want you to, can we talk about that? So let's get into that. So the
Sure.
codependency, is that one of the major drawbacks that you see in addiction, especially between families and addicts? And talk to us about codependency.
Yes. Okay. All right. The reason I got so interested, well, a few reasons is, I mean, alcoholism and addiction is a disease of relationships, right? For the most part. And we learn how to relate to each other from our early, what are called object relations, which are relationships with our parents. And for most of us who became addicts, most of us didn't grow up in, I would say, a normal, healthy household, right? So we learn these ways of relating most of the time where we compromise ourselves or we dismiss ourselves, and we're focused on, say, if our mother is an addict or depressed or whatever, a child will be way more focused on them to keep them safe rather than their own needs and thoughts and feelings. So I think what happens is we grow up in these environments where we're used to dismissing our own needs, our own feelings, our own thoughts, and focusing on maybe our parents to begin with. And then when we get sober, it just becomes a pattern of relating. And the reason it's so important is because addiction is a way we stay distant from ourselves. And codependency is the same thing. It's a way we get out of our own reality, our own thinking, our own feeling, and focus on someone else. And how many people have you met who get sober, get in a relationship, and the next thing you know, they're
Right.
they're feeling crazier, they're using, and a couple of things that happened to me during my practice, and I say this in the book, and I'm not kidding, is most people that came to me that started recovery had a heck of a time speaking up for themselves. Not only speaking up for themselves, but even knowing what their feelings and thoughts are. Everybody's kind of in reaction to fear, and we can talk more about that. Fear of what someone else is going to think, fear of what if someone's going to get mad at me, fear if someone's going to reject me. So all my interrelational behaviors are going to be based on that, which is codependency, rather than what do I think and feel. And that's what recovery from codependency is, and what recovery from addiction is. It's getting in touch with what's happening over here in my body rather than what are those people thinking? What do they need?
I love
So
that so
go ahead.
much. That's powerful. So to add some perspective to that, it's one of the main themes I talk about on Sober is Dope is the fear of missing out. And that's the same
Oh,
kind of thing. Instead of focusing on the things that you can control,
yes,
finding ways to make your life exciting and feeling fulfilled, you tend to you're thinking from a perspective of what am I missing out on? What are other people doing? We call it
yes,
the Friday night blues. We find people get stuck on the weekends because they feel
yes,
like I can't drink, so I can't relate and have fun. So they're almost codependent on society's idea of what fun is and these ritualistic systems of going out, getting drunk and wasted as a form of release of fun, but it's actually the toxic
absolutely.
behavior that keeps them in that vicious cycle. So what I like to
Yes.
tell people is you have to learn to tap into your creativity, use
Yep.
your imagination, and don't depend on what other people's expectation or idea of fun is. Create your own ideas of fun, right? Especially in recovery.
Absolutely.
You have to be creative. Um,
Absolutely. And so much of that thinking too, Pop, is delusional because we're actually making up in our heads that, oh, someone else is having a great time tonight or someone else is living the dream when really it's a fantasy. It's like when you go to a meeting and you think, oh, everybody in here knows each other and are friends. And then you realize, no, they don't. I
right.
mean, that's why and you talk a lot about this in your book, like our thought patterns. And part of my recovery has been really creating a relationship with my thinking that doesn't take me out, meaning your thoughts are just thoughts. They just pop in and pop out. And our job is not to take them all so seriously and
Right.
create more positive ones.
Uh,
Negativity, you talk a lot about negativity, and a lot of negativity can come from fear.
yes.
Fear of what someone else thinks, fear of, like you say, fear of missing out. And then
Yeah.
we get negative. Go ahead.
No, fear is a whoa, that's a heavy subject because especially in addiction, the biggest fear that I see that people that suffer from substance misuse have there is fear surrounding their ability to live a fulfilling life without outside of their drug of choice or without their drug of choice, right?
Yes.
It's this fear. What am I going to do? How I'm going to party? How I'm going to connect with the opposite sex? How I'm going to be
Right.
romantic? Am I going to be
Right.
interesting? Then we have this the liquid courage mechanism of addiction and drugs
Right.
or alcohol that I need this thing to be fun and to be me, which is the saddest part. I need this external thing to be me, and it's not you. You have
Not at all.
everything you need to be you. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, you're really talking about kind of early recovery stuff. And I did listen to your episode on relapse, which I thought was great because I think, there was a saying when I first came around, which was, the relapse happens way before the relapse happens.
Right.
So meaning, you could have a fight with your girlfriend on a Thursday, not really be aware of how you feel about it, and then 2 weeks later relapse. But it's because you maybe got upset or enraged or angry or felt rejected. You don't acknowledge it or feel it. And then suddenly you want to drink and you don't know why. Do you know what I mean? So
Absolutely.
yeah. So part of that early sobriety thing, like you're saying, I mean, all those things are so true, right? We don't know what it's like to have sex or I remember not even knowing how to go to the supermarket. I mean, anything without being under the influence. But until you can kind of put a few days together and realize, oh my God, I'm actually getting to know my real self, like you just said. I'm not my real self when I'm under the influence. I need to get to know this person that's evolving and coming out now. And that could be just as more interesting.
Right. And I'm finding that even outside of early recovery, people with time, they get to this
Yes.
place where they kind of like they lose
Get
grip with
stuck.
they get stuck. And I try to explain, there's many things the whole point of the podcast is giving people multiple tools that they can
Yes.
use to get past that. But I want to
Yes.
jump a minute. Cold crazy. It fits another theme that I talk about on Sober's
Go
Dope. A
ahead.
lot of comorbidities, right? Comorbid addictions. And the reason why I love this is because this leads us into the relationship between your mental health and how that relates to your addiction, all right? And
Right.
sometimes people have these co-occurring disorders that they don't really address. They may address the addiction, the alcohol misuse, the drug misuse, but they don't address the depression, the anxiety, the grief. Now, that connects totally to codependency because it's
Yes.
usually related to a relationship with some other person, right? Someone in my life died, right? I experienced that as loss and grief, and that changes my brain through neuroplasticity, right? And I have these emotional or mental health outcomes because of it, thus making me depend on this drug of choice, and then the cycle continues. The only problem is the drug of choice does not help. It adds to the depression, the anxiety, and then they keep just going into this whirlwind and banging against each other. Right. So I try to tell people you have to address both the mental health components, see a psychiatrist, a therapist, address your underlying pain points while you're trying to address your addiction. You have to do it together because they are co-occurring. It's a
Yeah.
comorbid situation. And I think it all relates. Can you talk about how relationships and
Oh,
mental health affects it?
that's such a huge topic, right? I mean, I remember when I got sober, and in the early days, they'd say, be sober for a year before you diagnose something. That was like 30 years ago, because substance abuse covered up so many other mental health issues, anxiety
Mm,
or bipolar or
mm.
depression or personality disorder. And now it seems like people who are getting out of the hospital, they're really trying to address both. And so if someone gets out, a lot of people now are on an antidepressant, even if it's just for a short amount of time, to hopefully keep their mood elevated enough so they can remain sober for a while. But it's really tricky when you address this topic, because my feeling is sometimes, and I can't say for everyone, but I think depression specifically, there's so many pieces to it. There's biology, like you talked about, the neurotransmitters or your thyroid or your diet. We talk a lot about that, or whatever, sugar. I mean, that has put me into depressions before. And then there's the psychological piece, which is the thoughts and feelings. So the way I think, or the feelings, like you just said, the grief or the depression or the sadness or the fears. Then there's the social part, which is, how can I be happy if I'm isolated at home and I have no connections? So you could be depressed. Like, I remember meeting with someone in the hospital, and they had this severe depression, but they were in an abusive relationship. And so it's like, well, how can you resolve the depression if you're going to remain in the abusive relationship? So the social piece is really important. And then the spiritual, do you have connection with a higher power of some kind? So everybody, I think, has different percentages of each one. One person could have a totally biological depression, and someone else could be in an abusive relationship. So it's hard. You really need to piece it out and get someone off the substances to start, because a lot of things could be contributing to it. Like you said, I mean, my feeling about grief lately is it's the biggest feeling that our culture and people don't tolerate or process. I think so much of our work and recovery is unresolved grief. And it's a feeling that, people are confused about, people don't know how to work through, people get overwhelmed by and then just get busy. And the thing is, grief is a normal part of the human condition. That's one thing we all have in common. We all have loss. And I think, for whatever reasons, maybe addicts have a hard time feeling sad. I mean, addicts, I say in the book, we want to be 72 and sunny all the time. We want to be feeling good, rather than allowing the feelings to come up, letting them be processed and work them through and get to the other side. But
Right.
addicts are so afraid of just having feelings initially. I mean, don't you think so?
I love that. All right. So how you phrase that, addicts are afraid of the feelings initially, right?
Initially.
Because people are usually afraid of feelings all the time, right?
Yeah.
all the time. But in the context of addicts, you're right. It initially they don't want to really because that's what we're hiding from. We're
It's
covering up.
feeling uncomfortable,
Yeah,
right?
you have to get comfortable feeling uncomfortable. No, I agree.
Yes. Yes.
100%. And I was taught like so how I was framing the concept of grief. I was listening to other psychiatrists that I was talking about,
Sure.
and one thing that really struck me was
Yes.
that when I thought about grief, it was only in relationship to death. It
Got
was,
it.
but it could be a loss of a job. People mourn, grieve over
Absolutely.
that breakup, that relationship. It's all grief, and grief really does affect your brain. But that brings us into post traumatic stress. How our environment can have us deal with these traumatic instances. But you
Yep.
said something amazing. Like if you could sit with it, and you could come out on the other side a little bit better if you allow yourself to feel. And we know that as post traumatic growth. No, we never hear about people talking about post traumatic growth. Just hearing
Absolutely.
that Dr. Michael Tedeschi had formed this whole theory of post traumatic growth where he was talking about resiliency and people being able to bounce back from trauma and coming out
Right.
on the other side better. And I
Right.
think with us just sharing these terms with people, hey, do you know that there's a possibility that you could be better you could heal and become better on the other side of your trauma and your grief and stuff if you
Absolutely.
allow yourself to go through it in a healthy, responsible way, not just get slammed all day and hide it. That was my thing. Oh, I was a pro. I was slam, slam, slam until I totally forgot my name, right?
Right.
But the problem was when I started to come to and sober up, those feelings did not. They'll be right there with me. They didn't go anywhere. It was no therapy, and I could really attest to that. You know?
Absolutely. It's so overwhelming. I mean, it's so crazy when you think about being a human being because, like, when we're kids, right? We're full of vitality. We're running around, we're crying one minute and then, laughing the next. If you see a 5-year old, they have 10 different feelings in 15 minutes. But then all of a sudden we grow older and we start taking drugs and we think feelings are like these enemies when really to be a human being is to feel sadness, to feel happiness, to feel grief. But we get so afraid of it rather than just letting it naturally come. And you're right. Like getting sober initially, we have a lot of feelings, but also codependency is a way to stay away from feelings too, because codependency is where I'm much more focused on my partner's thoughts and feelings and behaviors rather than mine. So, for a lot of people who get sober, they get into relationships because it takes the focus off of them, right? I mean, how many people have you seen where they're 6 months sober and they're doing really well, and then they get into a relationship and they disappear. And when you're having a conversation with them, all they're talking about is the other person rather than geez, well, what do you think about them? How do you feel about them? It's what the other person is feeling rather than what they're feeling. So, codependency is a way to stay distant from yourself as well. And that's why people can, people can stay in addictive relationships forever. And I often say that, an addict, oftentimes when a couple would come in and one person would be addicted and then there'd be the spouse, the spouse would think, oh, if they just got sober, we'd be all set. And the thing is, the spouse has an illness too. They have the codependency where they've been in denial. So both people have a sickness, not just the addict. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's a family illness.
Well, you're gonna love this. So let myself as a case study. So
Tell me.
I'm 10 years sober. I went traditional. I was walking in the sober's dope story starts. I'm walking in the middle of the street. I lost my house. I lost everything. I came from a very successful background. My dad died when I was young. All this. I was making money out of college. I just kept drinking because it was something that we did for fun, for music and real estate.
Sure.
Long story short, fast forward in, everyone knows the sober's dope story, but it led me to this place. My rock bottom was really it was bad because it was middle of the winter in New York. I had a big fight with my mom. My house burnt down.
Oh my gosh.
I lost my girlfriend. And this is all about myself and my girlfriend. Her family sent her to Boston because we was like partying together. We both came from states of grief. So she went through a breakup and I went through a breakup, and somehow we met and we just latched on to each other for
Yes.
dear life. But we did it in an addictive environment. We drank all day. We made love. We had fun. We just detached from reality. We only had one agenda. It was to get up, figure out how we could extend our party, and
Yes.
just keep going. We did that successfully for about 2 years straight, until we both got really sick, and like
Yes.
our family separated us, and we was this is the best case of codependency I ever in
I
myself. I
bet.
mean, it was so like literally her family had to take her to Boston, put her somewhere, separate me, send me on a bus. Like,
Wow.
long
Yes.
story short, I went back. Now I'm going through all of this withdrawal. My girl's not here. I can't. My money ran out. My friends are not calling me. I have to go back home to my mother. Now, within 3 days, my mom and I have a big blowout fight. Get out my house. Don't ever talk to me again. Now I'm
Oh geez.
heartbroken because this is my best friend. I love my mom. My dad died. This is my hero. How did my addiction get me to this place where I fight with mom, right? So now I'm roaming the streets depressed. I lost my house burned down. I can't go back to mom's house. My girlfriend's not
It's
here.
gone.
I'm done. And I'm literally just started sleeping on my friend's floor when he happened to be home. So he was a DJ. So I have to roam the streets till about 3 o'clock in the morning. I sleep on the floor till about 6 and have to leave the house again. I did that for about a week and a week and a half. And then one day I was just walking, got on my knees, cried, threw a Hail Mary to God, said, God, if you're still there, save my life. I heard a voice, followed the voice. It was supernatural. It was a very transcendent, very beautiful, miraculous, what we call a vital spiritual experience I had.
Yes.
I use all my spirituality coming from a Catholic background and all of that. So now let me wrap it up. I go into detox and I go into rehab. And when I meet my counselor in rehab, she specifically said, in order for you to leave this program successfully, you have to leave your girlfriend.
Wow.
Because there's no possible way with your story. Y'all both went hard. Y'all went together for years. And now she's not here. You're going to come out. You're going to find her. She may still be using. She's going to have this pattern. Now, this is what's different. I'm a little bit older than my girlfriend by a few years. I felt spiritually like part of my behavior kind of pushed her addiction too far. So I felt somewhat responsible. Like,
Responsible for
how,
it.
how am I going to get sober now and then just abandon her? And I love her so much. And I'm telling you, my counselor it was no flexibility. It was no negotiation. She was like, this is not going to work. And I had to do a really good job convincing her that we have to make this work because there's no way I'm leaving her and I love her. And
Okay.
I have to figure it out. But it was the hardest, I would say, 9 years to come of my life, because it took her a lot of that 9 years to kind of find herself and to work out her situation.
For her to get sober?
Yes.
Did she get sober too?
Yes, finally. Yes.
She did. But
Thank God.
In a different way.
No, she just got sober, but it took 9 years to get there. So I'm 10 years sober, and like this is like kind of one for her, right?
Oh, so you guys have been hanging in the whole time?
The whole time. And I literally went through every kind of scenario that a sober person would have to go through with their codependent partner still using. I did that for 9 years.
Oh my gosh, Pop, I can't believe we're talking.
I know it was so hard, but it was so beautiful because I loved her so much, and I understood the true person that she was outside of her addiction, and she did a lot of great things. It wasn't like she was on the.
No, of course they're beautiful people.
Yeah, she worked, she did all this creative stuff, but she had to work out her things. And finally, we get to enjoy each other, and we're like the novelty of us both being sober now, and she's sober is so beautiful and fun. But it was a tough 9 years. Now I can understand that if I wasn't as spiritually strong, and if I wasn't as certain as I was in my recovery. And if God didn't give me that miraculous transformation, I don't think I would have been able to make it. So I'll qualify all of this to say, if you are not in that emotional and spiritual space, you can't play with codependency. Because I'm telling you, I was many days where I felt like just jumping off a building or just killing myself. I was so stressed, right?
Pop, I literally say, and I don't know if people will believe this, that codependency is just as lethal as addiction. It really is, because when you're focused, I've seen this happen to parents of kids with addiction. They practically lose their own lives trying to save their child.
Right.
Or, like you're saying, and even when I was living with my husband, when he was relapsing, I was getting sicker and sicker and sicker because I kept trying to fix him.
Right.
And until I just let him, asked him to leave and took care of myself, that's the delusion of codependent behavior, is we believe we're helping someone, and literally all we're doing is hurting ourselves and delaying the inevitable for them. So we're not helping anyone. We're actually hurting both people. But in our heads, we believe we're doing the best thing. So
Right.
that's what is so tricky about codependency. I mean, when you say, I could have jumped off a building, I totally get that, because you get so crazed wanting this person to get well and get the program. I mean, 9 years is a long time.
Right. 9 years is a long time. And so what would you say to family members who feel like, all right, is these situations where they do take that step to heal, they tell their family to move, and somehow they die and relapse and they live in this regret. What if I did this? Why? How do we work that out?
Well, I mean, obviously there's a 12-step program, there's Al-Anon, there's ACOA, but the key is really and this is it's not going to sound right because it's counterintuitive, is to focus on yourself, right? It's to heal yourself. I mean, it's like the saying in Al-Anon, you didn't cause it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it. You have
Right.
those 3 C's, right?
Right.
You have to believe that. I mean, this is what I say to people a lot of times. If they come in and they've been in a relationship where they're trying to get their partner sober, I'll say, well, what have you done? And
Right.
they'll give me this long list. So I took them to a psychiatrist. I got them into AA. I took them to therapy. I got them on this medication. And I'll say, and how did it work? And they'll
Right.
say, well, it didn't. And so it's like, all you need to do is look at the facts of all the things you've done to try to quote unquote help this person.
Right.
And none of them work until the person themselves, I'm sure your girlfriend, until she decided, like, I really need to do this. I don't know how she could have done it. I mean, did you try a zillion ways to try to help her? And it just kept, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's tough. I'm certain it's not possible until the person is ready, and we know that by you can't get around that in recovery
You
addiction.
can't.
The person has to be ready. But the thing is, I think my love and my presence and me being there gave her the comfort. I'm glad I was there to catch her when I did. Well, no, she caught herself. But I was
Right.
there. And but I
Now,
did try. I tried everything. Yeah, I tried everything. Yeah.
did you ever, like, I think it's great to be there for people, but there's also the setting boundaries thing. I mean, did you ever give her consequences for something that would happen? Like, did you say, honey, I can't talk to you in the morning if you're under the influence, or I can't see you for, like, did you ever give her any consequences for
I
her
did.
use?
I did, and I was one.
Yes.
I had the ability to be perfectly balanced in a way because I understood her cravings as a former addict and an addict myself.
Yes.
But I also would, it was times where I broke up with her, said, "Look, I'm
Yes.
done,"
Yes.
and then and she would sober up and be like, let's try to work it out. It was times where I would just really express like if certain behaviors that come from the addiction continue, I'm
Yes.
totally out. So I gave
Good for
ultimatums
you. Yes.
and I did set boundaries and I had in my mind an exit strategy because I understood that there was no way I could do this any like if forever.
Yes.
Right. It was,
Yes. Yes.
and I did say things like there would be no way I'm marrying you or having kids in this environment. So
Yes.
we could
Yes.
kind of be as very compassionate as boyfriend and girlfriend, but that's as far as it's gonna go.
Yes.
I knew
Yes.
that in my heart because I didn't want to. Because I grew up in environments where it was like I saw what parents in the household how it looked when someone was addicted, and it
Was
wasn't
there
pretty.
addiction? Was
Yeah.
your dad?
No, well, my dad, it was addiction, but it was different back then. I mean, I would say it wasn't like they got it. My family, my mom and dad would get up and have to drink. They were very normal, but they were very high functioning
Yes.
people.
Yes.
But the problem was in retrospect, I just think the quality of my father's life would have been different if he was similar to me. He was allergic to alcohol. It didn't fit him.
Right.
He was never supposed to drink. He had an enlarged heart. He was very passionate, emotional, old school bravado man. And I always sit there. I think about this all the time. What would life have looked like for dad if someone never introduced alcohol in his life? And he
Right.
started late in life, around 20, in his late 20s, he started drinking.
Got it.
So
Yep.
I knew it wasn't for him, and and it was just this darkness I saw them in, and to see him die at 52, which is so young. I didn't know how young my dad was back then, but I'm 44, so I'm like, yo, 52 is young. Like,
Yes,
whoa,
absolutely.
that's right
Absolutely.
around the corner for me, and I don't want to die at 52. He was a kid.
No,
In my mind, my
no.
dad was still very young, and just to see how, and I don't think it was alcohol. He had an enlarged heart, so I'm not going to blame it on alcohol. But I think like his health would have been better.
Well,
We
alcohol's
know,
not good for your heart. Yeah.
yeah, not alcohol is terrible. So yeah, my mother and father both, and my mom, she found her sobriety about 5, 6 years ago. I would say this: codependency can work. I would say both ways in a sense where when I got sober, everyone that was codependent on me kind of started to get sober too. It was like a ripple effect. Some of my friends, my mother, my siblings. So now when you come to my house for a holiday, it used to be a real big party, a lot of drinks, very festive. We come from a old school kind of like real formal festive type family. We have big Christmas party, banquets. My mom is a
Got it.
chef. My brothers are chefs. We cook big food. We Catholic. We go to church. We come home. We party. We love God. It was very beautiful. It was an old time. It wasn't like, oh, we just drink. It wasn't like that. It was
Right.
always mass
Right.
behind feasts,
Celebratory.
like feast
Yes.
days and stuff like that.
Yes.
But between that's how alcohol is insidious. Between all of that glam I'm kind of sprinkling on it, it's still addiction there. Right.
Yes.
So we have to be careful.
Absolutely.
And my mom, unfortunately, who was codependent, I guess, of my dad, and I guess it just ended. It was like a Greek tragedy because he died young.
Yes.
She had 6 kids. She had to raise us all. One of her kids was a Roman Catholic priest. My older brother, he goes off to become a world scholar. She has the five of us. I'm a younger knucklehead running the streets, giving her a hard time. They're trying to keep me in Catholic school. We're doing all of this stuff, and she's by herself, right? And I'm like, well, your husband was supposed to be here. And I think if alcohol was never in the mix, it would have been it would have been better for the family
Of
overall.
course.
Yeah. So, all right. So, welcome back, and I'm really excited. So, that was my mom and dad's story. I think codependency affected them, and for me, I'm one of the rare cases where I survived. That, and my girlfriend also survived, and I'm really happy I was strong enough. But I would just want to say to everyone out there, it was one of the hardest things. So if you're in recovery and you're in a codependent relationship where the other person is still
Yes.
dealing with their recovery or their addiction, you have to prioritize your healing, and you can't feel obligated, or you can't put yourself in a position where you're guilty if you take steps to protect and rescue yourself while you're healing, because the biggest part of our message in sobers though is healing. So from here, what advice could you give
Yes.
your our audience strategies and context?
Well, what I would say too is, again, like you're saying, we can't get someone sober, but we can definitely influence if someone's going to choose sobriety or not. So, I mean, that's why I was asking you about consequences, because if someone stays married to someone for 20 years and they never say a word about their drinking, they're not helping themselves and they're not helping their partner. So, part of codependency recovery, if you're with an addict, I mean, it's not just being in a relationship with an addict that's codependent. We could talk about that also.
Right.
I'm trying to broaden it to just most relationships.
Right.
But for an addict specifically, the irony is if you start focusing on yourself, it gives the message to the person that, oh, they're going to now stop taking care of me or stop enabling me. And it gives them the message like, wow, I may have to do something about this.
Right.
So there's something about setting boundaries, speaking up, telling them what's acceptable and what's not. I'm going to stop calling your boss or whatever it is that actually helps them to choose sobriety. It sounds so counterintuitive when I say, well, how you help is you focus on yourself, but it really is how you do help. You focus on yourself and your own recovery and you set limits, and that helps the other person to not suffer, but have consequences of their own behavior. It's like having a child. You don't want to constantly save your kid from having feelings. You want them to experience consequences of their behaviors. If we keep saving an addict from experiencing consequences, they'll never have any motivation to get sober. So,
Powerful.
right?
Powerful. And I can't, and so now thinking from my perspective, I was in my former relationship before my girlfriend and I'm with now. It was kind of like that person did not drink, and I eventually it was the ultimate consequence. They broke up with me because I was unmanageable. I was like the poster boy for unmanageable. So it was like, but I did register that as abandonment and I was very angry. It did not help me in any way get sober. I went on for another 20, well, I would say, yeah, another 15 years of just straight up debauchery.
Because
Now
you were in so much pain.
it was the grief that kind of exploded, and I had this addiction which was from other forms of grief, like losing my, like with the real estate meltdown, I lost all of this money, people responded to me different, I'm grieving. The things about my dad coming up, I'm grieving, I'm going through this, I'm using, I'm depressed, I'm young. I don't Another
Yes.
thing was I didn't know why I was addicted to this alcohol. I just knew after everyone started partying, this thing kept pulling me.
Right.
And then I lose the relationship, and I'm just like, oh man. And from there, I started losing everything: relationship with my mom, the house, this and that. The one person that did stick, that came out of all of that loss, was my new girlfriend. So when I
Yes.
got sober, the last thing I wanted to do was abandon her, like my other girlfriend abandoned me. So it became this thing where I was just juggling. But I do, so I say all of that to say this: there is a certain amount of pain and rejection and abandonment
Yes.
that the person will feel when the person that's not addicted try to protect themselves and heal and set
Yes.
boundaries, right? So
Well,
I would say, however you set your boundaries, do it in a compassionate way. Don't just
yes.
be right. Okay.
Yes. Very good. Very good. I mean, the saying with codependency healing is I'm not responsible for anybody else's thoughts, feelings, or behaviors. But it's much different to say to someone, you need to stop drinking. And honey, I love you. I really want to have this connection. It would really help our connection if you could think about your sobriety. I mean, it really depends how you speak to them, obviously. And the problem is when you're codependent, you're typically really pissed off because
Right.
because you've tried so many things. And that's
Right.
why so often when someone gets sober in a relationship, the partner is so enraged, but they don't see that they have work to do too. I mean, I've seen so many couples where someone gets sober and after a year they're like, I don't know if I can stay married. My wife or my husband isn't getting their help because they need help for their codependency. Just because someone gets sober doesn't mean everything's going to be fine now. I mean, that's delusional, right?
It
But
is.
you said something so interesting when you said that your that last girlfriend broke up with you and you got activated. You know, I talk a lot about that in codependency recovery because, and you nailed it. You said the breakup very often triggers older griefs and losses, right? So you have the breakup from this girl, but then also now you're having the loss, think remembering your dad, or then you're having these other losses with the real estate. And that's the thing about grief is a relationship can end, or you can move, or you can lose a job, and then other losses get activated. It can be really tricky.
Yeah, really tricky.
It can
So
be, and it can be really painful.
and very painful is not. I mean, you just it feels like everyone, the whole world abandons you when you stuck in that space, and I know that. So I always tell people, and this is really powerful because I speak to families who's like, no one talks about our perspective, right? And it's just Al-Anon, so it's not enough, I think, for families to
Yes.
feel heard. And I
Yes.
always tell, we did episodes about this recently where I'm like, listen, if you're in addiction, you have to understand where your family's coming from. They're not being cold, they're not being callous. I'm talking about the level of abuse. Because I have to be realistic and hard with the addiction community because I'm one.
Yes.
We can't sugarcoat
Yes.
it, doesn't help them. The level of abuse and trauma we put our families and friends and our
Yes.
and the people that support us through is you can't calculate that. You can't measure it. It's very traumatic for them. I mean, they don't know if you're gonna come home. It's like
No.
we can't sleep, we can't eat, we suffer with you in the addiction. Now, the
Yep.
most compassionate thing I think an addict can do is understand that and communicate effectively with the people they love. That's why I teach the way I do on Sober is Dope. Because I
Yes.
think when someone hears it, they could say to someone, listen, I don't think I could get sober right now. I'm just
Right.
stuck, but I hear you and I want the help and I just need a little bit more time. I just kind of communicate let the other person know that you have some like you get it, you're aware, and that you want to somehow heal and you're open to it, at least being open. But you just can't be
Right.
like, well, you don't get it and this and that. Because after a while, I tell people when it starts to affect your mental health and sanity, then you must disconnect. Like I
Right.
was strong. I was
Right.
shrouded by faith, God, prayer. I'm strong. I was a little bit older, so I had that. I have younger sisters and younger siblings, so I had kind of like this brotherly thing with my girl where I was like, I could do this, but I'm strong enough. I've been prepared longer. That was my idea, but it's
Got it.
dangerous. I'm saying that to say it's extremely dangerous because if by the grace of God, let's just say I wasn't as strong, I would have totally imploded. So you don't want to play with that. You just want everyone has to communicate, and families and friends out there, if you know someone that's dealing with addiction and they're a pain in the butt, you're at your wits' end. You have to be prepared to do what you have to do to survive and to thrive. And like my brother, the Roman Catholic priest said, he said, Joe, I tell you something. I seen this all the time with codependency. He says, as a priest, you will be with someone that's extremely toxic and they're a total mess, and you feel like the moment you let them go that they might die or something happen. He said, I seen it in so many cases. At the moment you leave, that person somehow miraculously just figures it out. They survive. They don't die. They'll be okay, right? So you don't have to feel like you need to you're not God. We're not God. So we don't have to be the end and all to this other person's healing or the possibility of their healing. When it's time and you know it's time, you must disconnect to heal yourself and for you not to go crazy. I've seen people really go crazy.
Absolutely.
I've seen people have
Absolutely.
heart. I've seen people get
Absolutely. I mean,
cancer and stuff and heart attacks and cancer from the stress of dealing with another addict. It's serious.
well, do you know? Well, have you know Gabor Mate? I'm sure you've heard of him,
Absolutely.
right?
That's my
Okay.
guy.
All right. So his second book, When the Body Says No,
Yes, yes.
that book is literally all about codependency
Right.
because every example he gave of a patient that had some disease, whether it was multiple sclerosis or cancer or heart problem, literally every case was a case where someone could not disconnect in a relationship and was putting way too much power in someone else's hands. And that's the thing about codependency too, is my feelings about myself are in someone else's hands. Do you know what I mean?
Right,
Like,
right. It's
yeah,
like living vicariously through another person, right? It's like it's weird.
yes,
It's bizarre.
yes.
And
Well, and it's fear based. I
it's
mean,
fear
just like
based.
addiction is really self centered fear. So is codependency. I mean, I
Okay.
think the fear of abandonment, like you talked about, keeps us in those codependent relationships. But what we're doing is we're abandoning ourselves,
Ooh, heavy.
right? We're
Nice.
abandoning ourselves, but we're staying in
Wow.
this thing because we're afraid they're going to abandon us. But
Oh
it's
my
already
God.
happened.
That's
So,
powerful.
yes. Yeah.
That I never heard it like that. That's a great that you heard it here on Sobers though. When you stay within a toxic relationship or codependent relationship that doesn't serve you, you abandon yourself. That's incredible. All
Yes.
right, so before we wrap, because we have to do a lot, so just to give context, Dr. Sarah Michaud is going to be coming on Sober is Dope to help us with codependency and other aspects of recovery as an expert. So we're very lucky to have such a qualified person to be part of the team. So we'll do more episodes. What tips and strategies can you give someone that's in a codependent relationship that's toxic at this point? What can they do to heal themselves, to get out, to help the other person? Any context there?
All right. One thing I would say, a few good tools are, and this is something we do with addiction too, is I always say this, stick with the facts. Because the thing is, addiction is a disease of denial, and interventions are based on what are the facts? Okay, he hasn't gone to work in two, like sticking with the facts. It's the same with codependency. I remember a woman in a very abusive codependent relationship kept denying what was happening. And I said to her, look, I want you to document the reality of the relationship each day. Has this person verbally abused you or not? If you can say to yourself, what are the facts of this relationship I'm in? Am I happy? Am I being abused? Are they actively using? Am I getting my needs met? Are they validating my feelings? You know, all of those questions. I think when you're in a toxic relationship, you're in a state of denial and delusion, and you're rationalizing people's behavior, you're minimizing the pain that's being caused. So sticking with the facts is huge. It helps you get out of your denial. Asking yourself, are my needs being met? Am I happy? Am I way more focused on this other person's problems than my own? Am I detached from myself? Am I in touch with my own thoughts and feelings? I'm probably giving you too many answers, but yeah.
Oh no, that was great. That was great. And we'll cover more topics. This is a broad topic. I
Yeah,
feel it.
it is.
You
Yes.
can't do it in one episode. So that's why we're
No.
gonna make it. We're gonna do like a little mini series and we're gonna talk about this because this is one of the I think the most important topics that we don't cover enough, right? Codependency with a person. You're talking about family, your relationship with your family, the world, the friends, your network, your lover. It's everything.
Absolutely.
It's everything.
Yes.
And everyone
Yes.
is effective. So we'll just say this: if you are in a toxic, hurtful, or painful, codependent relationship, think about and use this episode to really think about what your healing looks like and what you
Yes.
need, and don't trap yourself in a situation that is unhealthy for you, right? You want to make
Yes.
sure because you're living with we live with the addict, and it's not easy. And to everyone out there that's dealing with addiction, we love you. This episode is not an attack. Go ahead, Doc.
One more thing is to say to yourself, are the things I'm doing working?
Mm.
And be honest with yourself, because very often you've already done 25 things to help this relationship and you're in denial that it's not working. So ask yourself that question. Is this working for me or not? And am I getting healthier or worse? Okay.
Right. You heard
Yes.
it from us. You're
All right,
listening
go
to
ahead.
Sober is Dope podcast. That's our episode with Dr. Sarah Michaud. She's the author of the book, the amazing book. Go get it on Amazon and all platforms. It's Code Crazy, One Psychologist Recovery from Codependency and Addiction, a memoir roadmap to freedom. It's one of the most amazing books. It's very interactive. It has so much great facts and information. This is an expert on codependency, and I'm really proud to finally have this episode with you, Sarah. So thank you. As for everyone else out there, if you're struggling with addiction, don't give up on yourself. Love yourself. Understand that you can't rescue yourself and be there for yourself. If you're in a codependent relationship with someone that's in addiction, we pray for you. Be patient. We love you and thank you for the good fight, but know when to disconnect with it in regards to your healing, your sanity, and your health. We love you. Thanks again. Sarah, before we wrap, can you let everyone know where they can find you?
Yeah. My website, drsarahmichaud.com. I have a bunch of tips on there and some podcasts. And also I do a YouTube channel called Leaving Crazy Town with a friend of mine. And it's all about healing from codependency. So there's topics each week, and go to the YouTube channel.
All right, all right. On that note, we'll catch you all on the other side. Go in peace and God bless.